let's start the second part. In it, we have seen the basic authentication, that is username and password. What could be the third party authentication? Authentication using popular social media websites, just like Twitter, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn. Easy to develop. It will be very easy. There are built-in methods in our passport middleware. We can use those methods, and these social media platforms are trusted, so provide authentication. No need to store username and password in particularly in our database. So whoever want to log in, that they can be log in using any of their account using Twitter, Facebook, Google, or LinkedIn, or any other. There are lots and lots of strategies. There are 140 plus strategies which can be implemented. But there can be case that people wants to store information in their local DB, as well as can provide a way out for third party authentication. So this can also be possible. So this is the way out. Whenever the user requests for a login from Facebook, we will redirect it to a third-party application. He or she will provide the username and password on third-party application site, and the third-party site will send us a response message. Either it is a success, or it will be a failure. If it is a success, we will say that is an authorized user, and we will provide the information whatever the user will be requesting. So this is the way we can provide a third party authentication. What are the options to implement this? That will be using passport. I have explained this. We can use the local strategy, Facebook, Twitter, and so on. 140 plus strategies that can be implemented. We can use the Mongoose local, or we can use, without using the Mongoose local, we can store the information into our DB. These are the implementation, but that will be explained in our next lecture. So after authentication, whenever the user will be authenticated, the information will be stored into our system for subsequent requests from that user, and that information can be stored into a stateful mechanism, that is sessions, or a stateless mechanism, that is JWT, JSON Web Token. So this JSON Web Token will be taught after one lecture. After the lecture of passport, we will see JSON Web Token, and session states management, we will see it today. So if we store the information into our session, what are the options? Session has two parts. One is the server side, which contains the actual information of the session, like the user ID, user role, user other information, whatever we want to put in our session. While another type of information, that is basically the session ID, that will be stored on a client side, and the storage mechanism for both sides will be different. By default, what a server will do, whenever a session will be created, it will store the information in server RAM, server main memory. This is the default scenario. That is a fully stateful server. That is not required. So other options are MongoDB store. We can store the information into MongoDB. We can store the information into a simple file stores, and we can store into a specialized storage, that is just like Redis, etc. Same on the client side. What we can do on the client side, we can store the information into cookies. That has been done in the past. A number of systems, maximum number of systems use these cookies. So this is one way, and the more developed mechanism is the local storage. We can use local storage instead of cookies also. So we will see one by one all of these storage systems. Basically, in our web server, our REST API is normally stateless. So we cannot store the session information on our web server. So whenever a client browser requests for a session, so we need to store that information into our DB or some other storage mechanism. we should not store into a server RAM. And same on the client side, we can store the information in web browsers. Two mechanisms are there. One is in the cookie, and second is our local storage. So these are the options we can have. I think so. You know well about the cookies. Just a quick go through. HTTP request just comes into the server. Not a lot of information required to identify the server. Only the basically session ID is required from the client side, and that session ID will be stored into your cookies. There can be other information with the cookies, just like time for life for the cookie, or max age. What we can say, the max age of the cookie, name of the cookie, and some other basic information that can be stored. So these are cookies. So small piece of data is sent from a web server and stored on the client side. Each subsequent request from the client side should include the cookie in the request header. Key value pair, it is just like a key value pair, have limited lifetime, attached to a particular domain. It is every cookie is specific to some particular domain which has created that cookie. Server can initialize cookie from HTTP request from the server side. So a cookie can be created, is created normally from the server side script, and created on the client side browser. This is a way out. Whenever a browser requests a server authenticate that user and provide a cookie information which is stored on the browser cookie storage. And whenever a subsequent request will come to the server, the cookie will be attached with the server with a specific domain which it has been created. So in Express, how we can handle cookies? There is cookie parser, a middleware, default middleware that handles a cookie. Whenever a cookie comes into our server, it attaches that cookies, and it will be accessible request.cookie.cookies dot the name of the cookie. So you don't need to worry about those cookies. If you want to set some cookie, you will just write response.cookie and the name and value and options for that cookie. It will create a cookie on the client side, and whenever the cookie will come into our server, by default it will be parsed by the cookie parser, which is a middleware, and it will attach the information of that cookie with request dot cookies dot name or whatever the parameters it has, key value pair, so you can access it. This is for the simple cookies. You can have signed cookies. For the signed cookies, you will provide, whenever you initialize the cookie parser, you will provide a key. Then that cookie will be encrypted and signed and sent to the client. And whenever that information will come back, we will rehash that information, and we'll check either it is the same cookie which we have stored, is there any forgery on the system, client system, etc. So we can create the signed cookie. The process is the same. It is again using the cookie parser, but it will be available at request.signedcookies.name. That was just cookies. This is signed cookies.name. What else we can do? We can sorry, before that, a cookie can have name and value, key value pair, expiration date, domain, path, secure, HTTP only, signed, secure cookies, HTTP only. These are all the possibilities, the options that can be provided with the cookies. Hopefully you have covered in your first part of web technologies course. The second way out, if we don't use the cookie, we can store that information into the local storage. Local storage has two functions. Sorry, in this case it should be local storage.get item, and this is local storage.set item. You can use these two parameters to store the cookies on the client browser. So not the cookies, store the information on the client browser. So local storage.set item will set information on the browser, local browser of the client, and get item will get the information from that client. So you can use local storage instead of cookies also. On the server side, this was all on the client side. Either you can store the information on client side using cookies, or you can use local storage. On the server side, what you can do, server can have a local data storage for sensitive information, user ID, whatever information it has, and send a cookie with the key to access that information. Now with the next HTTP request, browser sends this key back to the server, and server can assume that this request came from the same client, so it can provide seamless experience. This is the way out. If you say it has requested /count, server has created a session against that /count and provided a session ID to the browser. In the next request, your user has provided the session ID against that request, and for that the server has responded again with the session ID. So session ID is passed from client to server and server to client as a cookie value, means an information that needs to be stored into cookie. For example, for authentication mechanism, username and password has been provided with /login request. User authenticated the user, server authenticated the user, and provided back with the session ID. While this information, name, super user ID, will be stored on the server side, and this information will be stored on a client side. Next request, what browser did, it provided the session ID. Server checked with from its session that is this session ID is true. If it is, it provides back the information what it has requested with a session ID. Again, next request, it will provide the session ID. So the main information about that login user will be stored on the server side, while the cookie information will be stored on our browser end. So for that, what a server do is can store that information on the server side in server RAM, but whenever the server will restart, it will wipe out all the information. Second way out is to store that information on basically permanent storage. That can be database, that can be file system, or some distributed session store system, and etc. etc. How we can implement it? We can implement it using a middleware that is called ExpressSession. Express-session is a middleware. We will need to install it. Npm install Express-session. It will use cookies to store information on client side and store information on the server side. So, sorry. Whenever we install it, we will require it in app.use. Then we will initialize that middleware app.use session, and we will provide a key which will encrypt the information from server to client. And same app.get, whenever the request is received from the server, it will automatically parse and set request.session information with that basically route. So request.session will be available, request.session.username or session ID will be available with us. There are a few useful methods you can go through it, that is required, like I can explain few of those information. Resave, if true, forces a session to be saved back to the store even if it was not modified in the request. If there is no modification in the current request, still it will resave the session into session store. So that is option that can be reused. Same you can see secret, it is the required option and is used for signing the session ID cookie. That secret is used to encrypt the session ID so that it can be sent to the user in the encrypted form. So so these are all the options that can be used. These are very useful method. You can use any of these. So this is a basic example. What I did, I added ExpressSession in our application, then initializing that session with basically secret, and after that what I get, request.session. Request.session is already attached with every request now. And automatically this middleware will handle all the cookies that will need to store on the client side, all the cookies that all the information that needs to be passed to our server. So sorry, this by default mechanism will store the information on server RAM, Node.js memory. So Node.js memory will be used to store the sessions. So this is the default mechanism with which we can store the information, but it is stateful and this is not required to be implemented. We need to store this session information into some specific storage. For that we can use file systems. If we want to use the file system, we have the same ExpressSession, and what we need to install session file store. Then we can initialize a new file store, and that is the only new thing. This is a secret, and save uninitialized is the option. Resave false, this is the option, we can provide it or not. And the new thing that is there, that is store colon new file store. Now it will store the information to file system, not into basically server RAM or Node.js memory. So in this way we are using files to store our information. Same options are available with the request.session. Remaining code will remain the same. We can use MongoDB also. To use MongoDB, what we can do, we can use directly the Mongoose, or we can use Mongoose and connect Mongo. We have two options to do it. Just this is an example. In this case, what we did, same ExpressSession, we initialized that ExpressSession. We have defined the secret for our ExpressSession. Cookies optional parameter. Here it is important. Store new. Now we are creating a new DB store. Require ExpressSessions storage. MongoDB will be our storage system. We are using Mongoose, our server IP, localhost, port MongoDB port 27017, our database in which we want to store the sessions, and the collection name, and expires. This is the seconds in which it will be expired. So this is the way out. We can store the session information into DB directly instead of the server. This is one way. This is another way which connect Mongo. Again, only difference is new Mongo store. In last example, what we did, we did a new only, and then we have explained our parameters. In this we have in this Mongo connect Mongo, what we will do, we will use new Mongo store and provide the URL to our MongoDB access. That will be MongoDB colon double backslash localhost colon 27017 slash the database name. So this is the way out with which we can store the session information into our DB using basically ExpressSessions. Destroying session is so simple. Request.session.destroy. It will destroy the whole session that is for the specific user. Whenever you will request on the logout, you will call request.session.destroy. It will destroy the current session of the user, of a specific user. There is an example. Basically in this example I have implemented the session, and you can find this whole code, and this complete example is on GitHub repository, github.com/techmode/express-sessions. You can clone that repository and check how the sessions are working. There is no authentication in that example. You need to include the authentication into it, at least include the basic authentication. Also, to work on these, I will provide you two videos which will follow step by step code to implement these concepts which I have taught you till now. That is storing the information using ExpressSessions, using basic authentication mechanism, and using local file stores. So these are all the session information that can be included here. That's all. We will meet in our QA session for next questions. Thank you very much.